The epistle reading is Colossians chapter 1, beginning with the 11th verse. May you be strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, for all endurance and patience with joy, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. He has delivered us from the dominion of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. This is the word of God for the people of God.
This fall, we've been, beyond Sunday morning, engaged in a series called Good Questions, No Easy Answers. I hope you've tracked that. If you haven't, it's online. We've been asking questions like, is there a God? Why is the Bible so weird? What about science and religion? What happens when you die? Is Jesus the way? It's been great fun. One of the questions is, does prayer work? I have a friend who would say, oh, yes. Prayer absolutely works. I pray, God does stuff for me all the time. This is puzzling to me. I just have to be honest with you. I know more people who would say my prayers seem to, like, I send them up, but the gravity of earth just drags them back down. One of the things that we can say is prayer does work, especially if we're thinking of prayer as not so much asking God for stuff, but gratitude. If we express thanks to God, that really works. They've done studies of this. If you express gratitude, in writing or out loud to God, to other people, your anxiety scores come down a little, your depression scores improve a little. You're not cured, but it gets a little better. Just the expression of gratitude. If you express gratitude to somebody, it just makes their day, and it makes your day. Gratitude really works. I get sometimes around Thanksgiving, I don't know. I begin to think, what should I be grateful for? The main thing I want to do in life is be able to take the for off, right? I don't want to be grateful for blank. I just want to be grateful. I just want to be a grateful person. If I think about what to be grateful for, I fall into the trap of thinking about things. And when I think about things to be grateful for, it's kind of volume or quality of things, and then it becomes comparative with other people, and a lot of times it's about stuff that I actually earned for myself. Grateful for the house that I live in. Grateful for the food that we'll eat on Thanksgiving. I earned that stuff. You can make a case that it's from God somehow. And then we talk about being blessed, and you have to think about your neighbor who doesn't have the same stuff or as much. Last Sunday night, I got to teach the confirmation class. Once a year, our confirmands gather, dozens of 8th graders. It's very exciting. And it's kind of Q&A with Dr. Howell. They submit questions anonymously. And you can't imagine all the stuff that they ask. They'll ask stuff like, when was your first kiss? Why does an 8th grader want to know that? Several years ago, I got the question, I opened it, I read it out loud. How far is too far? You may laugh. It makes you nervous, I'm sure, but... So a question the other night, this was a wise one. It said, why does God allow poverty? So I talked about some of the causes of poverty, and then I said, as Christians, we never rest easy if there's anybody out there who doesn't have enough. I know religious people who rest very easy when somebody doesn't have enough because they blame them or they pity them. It's just okay with them if other people don't have enough. But Jesus, if we reach into the heart of God, we see that God never rests if everybody doesn't have enough. God wants us to be the people who we never settle for a situation where somebody out there doesn't have enough. That's why we do food collections and all of these things that I do. I can say I want to be grateful for people. And I had this thought exercise the other day of it's amazing how few people you actually need in your world. I was remembering when I started college, I looked around campus and I thought, I am going to have hundreds of friends here. And from the perspective of all these years later, I made 3. Just 3. And the 4 of us last night were texting each other madly, talking about all kinds of things. It turns out 3 is enough. We'll love each other till the day that we die. 3. You don't need a lot of people. What should you be thankful for? I think I said this last week or the week before. If I ask a 7-year-old, what do you want for Christmas? They'll give a list of things. If you ask somebody my age or older, what do you want for Christmas? If you have a list of things, something is really wrong in you. I'm sorry if that hurt anybody's feelings. When you get my age or older, if you say, what do you want for Christmas? They're just some people, and you want them to come and be with you for Christmas. And you don't want hundreds to come, like 3, 4, 5 will probably do. People. I think about Thanksgiving, I want to be thankful for God, which seems kind of ridiculous because if there weren't a God, I wouldn't be here to be thankful for God. But I want to be thankful for God. And the question that we ask on a day like this is, what kind of God are we talking about? This is Christ the King Sunday. How do we make sense of this? You know, years ago, the Da Vinci Code came out, Dan Brown's novel, and then the movie. I remember this dude up in Davidson. He was a good guy. He roared in my office one day. He's carrying a copy of the Da Vinci Code. I've told some of you this before. He drops it on my desk. He's pretty angry with me, and he says, why didn't you tell us this stuff before? And I said, because it's fiction. There's this very smug character in there named Sir Lee T-Bing. He's played by Ian McKellen. I adored Ian McKellen. He played Gandalf. How could he do this? He plays Lee T-Bing, and he's real smug. He's very scholarly. And he says, scholars have proven that no one thought Jesus was a big deal until the 4th century when the Emperor Constantine imposed this on, whatever. And you know this shtick. And the only response is, have you read Colossians chapter 1? We just heard it. This is 20 years after the death of Jesus. There are eyewitnesses standing around. His brother, who grew up with him, is standing around. And Colossians says, the fullness of God was in him. He created everything. All things were made through him, for him. But I get the wariness that makes something like the Da Vinci Code appealing, because the fact is, we fear coercion, don't we? We have this fear that somebody will coerce us. There'll be some powerful person that will impose something on us, and we just resist that with every fiber of our being. There's always an ambivalence in the Bible about having a king. The Israelites don't have a king like everybody else. Gideon wins a mighty battle, and the people come to him and say, be king over us. And Gideon says, no, 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 we don't have a king in Israel. Only God is our king. Like, that's the right answer. But the people persist, and they come to Samuel, and they say, we want a king. And Samuel warns them what it'll be like. He'll tax you. He'll send you into wars you don't like. He'll get rich, you'll get poor. But they say, no, we want a king. Please ask God for a king. And how do we say it? God answered their prayer. Like, they prayed for a king, God gave them a king, and boy, were they sorry that they got a king, because the king taxed them and sent them into wars they didn't like and became rich while they became poor. And we say Jesus comes along, we say that Jesus is the king. What kind of king is Jesus? Pilate looked at him and said, are you a king? He doesn't look much like a king. He gets depicted as a king in art. Our stained glass window there in the back, you don't see it much because you rightly are looking at me as I am preaching. Don't turn around, just back there. And it's Jesus as king. And he's got a crown, and it's like there's light shooting out of the crown. He's got this red regal robe. And below it, there's a saying. I came in here the other day, and I thought, now what does that say? And I squinted. I looked at it, and I thought, it says, I am the king of the world. And I thought, did Jesus say, I am the king of the world? And the answer is no. Do you know who said, I am the king of the world? Leonardo DiCaprio. In Titanic. He goes up to the front of the ship, anticipating when he'll come back with his girlfriend, and he's there with his friend Fabrizio, and he puts out his arms and he says, I am the king of the world. By the way, why in the world, in 1998, did Titanic win Best Film? Like, I've never gotten over that. For instance, there were way better movies that year, for instance, As Good as It Gets. In As Good as It Gets, right, Matt Damon plays this deeply troubled man, Will Hunting. And he's been scarred by being abused while he's a child, and he winds up with his therapist, played by Robin Williams. And the climactic scene, Robin Williams puts his arms around him, and as Will sobs on his shoulder, the therapist says, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Like, that's a gospel message. Another movie that year, better than Titanic, is As Good as It Gets. Jack Nicholson plays this very bizarre character, and he falls in love with his waitress, Helen Hunt. And he's not very good at this, but one night they're at dinner, and he wins her because he looks at her and says, you make me want to be a better man. And that's the gospel. God makes us want to be better men and women. The movie. I am the king of the world. What kind of king is Jesus? Jesus comes, he's humble, he's wounded. He touches the untouchables. He hangs out with the wrong people. He doesn't have any money at all. He suffered terribly. He is the image of God. Why did Jesus do all of these things? Because Jesus came and he was love. Love. There's no coercion in love. Jesus came to love. Jesus came so we could love. A lovely question from my confirmands the other night. Someone wrote in the question, why does God allow us to grieve? And I wish I knew who had submitted that question. I'd like to go back and say, what made you ask that? Are you grieving today? I don't know how to answer it, but I found myself saying the reason that we grieve is because God has given us the gift of love. If you love, you will grieve. Unless you're the first one out the door and then the other people grieve. But if you're not the first one out the door, if you love, you grieve. And I found myself talking to them, thinking of their age. When I was their age, I lost both my grandparents that I adored. I spent every summer with them growing up. They were the greatest people ever in my life. And when I learned of their death, I cried and I cried and I cried for days. And I still, at this advanced age, if I think about them much, I can still feel that grief, that knot. I miss them to this day. I thank God for that grief. Because what that means is there was that much love. There was so much love. I could grieve like that. My other grandfather, he was an alcoholic that I saw very rarely. When he died, I did not have that same grief. See, Jesus came so that we might love. We get confused even about the baby Jesus. God came as an infant. What are you going to do with an infant, right? You're going to, teach that infant some lessons. Yeah. In Christian art, it's so interesting. The infant Jesus, he's often portrayed on Mary's lap. Like he's got a crown. Sometimes he's got a sword. Like, why would you give a sword to an infant? Are you kidding me? But it's because we want this powerful Jesus. The real Jesus as an infant was vulnerable and weak. And what do you do with a vulnerable, weak child? You're tender. You're gentle. You just love them. Colossians said, this is amazing to me. It says that Jesus was the center of the world. All things were made for him. And that sounds extravagant unless you think about a newborn infant. Maybe you had one. I know this, you were one. At some point, you were a newborn infant. Now, I don't care how things have gone since then. In that moment, the whole world existed just for you. If you asked your parents in that birthing room, your mother is holding you, you could say, do you care about what's going on in the rest of the world? And your mother would say, oh no. The whole world exists for this small, at Christmas, we'll sing it, right? We'll sing, round yon virgin, mother and child. There's this holy circle. Have you ever seen it? You know, it's a mother and she's holding her newborn child, and all you can do on the outside is just look at the glow coming from the beauty of that circle, and it's the tenderest, most wondrous thing in all of humanity. It's just, that's why God said, I want them to know my heart. I want them to love me. I'll do that. I'll enter that circle. And we look at that round yon virgin mother and child, that tender circle, the whole world falling silent, stopping because of that one still moment. It's so beautiful. It's just all the love of human. It's just all right there. And God came to say, this is what I'm about. This is what I'm about. This is what you are about. Time stands still. It's almost like it's the center. Colossians says that Jesus is the center. All things hold together through him. Good Lord, don't we need that? Like, what's the center of life in this world? There's no center. It's just total chaos, isn't it? There's no organizing center. Things don't hang together. I love William Butler Yeats wrote a poem at the end of World War I. This is 100 years ago, but to me it sounds like he's describing life in the United States of America in 2022. And you have to think about the context in which William Butler Yeats wrote this poem. World War I has devastated Europe. I mean, it's a rubble. Like a third of the young men in Europe have died in this senseless war. And he's Irish. And if the war wasn't bad enough, the Irish troubles have began. That's a terrible thing. And then his wife is critically ill, and he writes the following poem. Maybe you learned it in school. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Anarchy is loosed upon the world. Everywhere innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, and the worst are full of passionate intensity. And then he adds, surely the second coming is at hand. Do those words not describe life in our world? There is anarchy. The good don't have a lot of conviction. The bad are full of passionate intensity. There is just chaos everywhere. There is no center that can hold, and all we can do is be hopeful with William Butler Yeats that the second coming is at hand. I don't know what you're going to do in the next week, but friends, Advent is coming. If we look at our lives, if we look at our world, there's really nothing else that we can do except say, come, Lord Jesus. O holy child of Bethlehem, be born in us today. We need you down here. We need you among us. And he's not going to come down with a sword and slay our foes. He comes as a vulnerable one, asking for nothing but gentleness and love and tenderness. That is our center. That is our hope. It's our only hope. So, friends, Jesus is our King. He's not a king like any other king we've ever seen. He's humble, kneels down, washes feet. He's really just a child, curled up in his mother's arm. Behold, our King. All love. Thanks be to God.